Hey, morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending this session. Right today, we're going to be talking about Alignment Planner Workspace and how to implement Alignment Planner. Right, so we're going to take you through a lot of detail here, really around like what the product is, and then more specifically around how do you go about implementing the solution. Okay, yeah, a little housekeeping rules. So I saw this in the chat. For the presentation, we're going to have everybody on mute. So this way we can kind of control the questions there. But we do recognize that there are going to be questions going on throughout the presentation. If that's the case, feel free to put it in the chat. And specifically, there's a QA button down in your toolbar. If you can put it into the QA section, this way it gets logged. I have several people on the team that are going to be part of this workshop, and they'll be able to answer questions as we go on here. The session will be recorded, and we'll be sharing that on the community site. We'll be sending out the community link to our session, so you can go back and refer to it as you see all the details that Scott's going to take you through. And then I do ask that, in an effort to get these sessions to improve them, to make them better over time, there's a short survey at the end, 5 questions. Just if you could please, fill out those questions. Your feedback is very much welcome. So the majority, safe harbor, the majority of the functionality and capabilities of the product that we're going to be showing you today, they're all embedded in the product and they're currently available on the market for our customers, right? So we're really talking about what's live and out there right now for customers. We will make reference to what's coming in the future, some roadmap items. We have some very exciting things around what we're doing with Alignment Planner. We want to share with you. And to the best of our knowledge, these are exactly the functionality that we're coming out, but given business conditions, things may change. All right, just to introduce myself, I'm Tony Panaleo. I lead the product success team. I'm located on the East Coast in Virginia. I've been with ServiceNow for approximately about 6.5 years now, and I lead the product success team. And our role is really around working with our customers to help them adopt the product, right? Functionality that's out on the market and drive adoption of that. And one of the longstanding members of my team, a long-term practitioner, leader inside of the SPM space is Scott Wallace, who will be leading you through this workshop. Scott?
Thank you, Tony. And welcome, everybody. And happy holidays. If you're celebrating, happy holidays to everybody. So let's talk about what we're going to cover today, right? So we just did some introductions and we'll have a poll coming up here in a minute. We'll talk about the value drivers of APW. And we'll talk about the workspace, concepts, navigation. We'll do a demonstration. Then we do some preparation, like what is it going to take to prepare your environment, some key considerations, right? Some checklists, some best practices, and next steps. So first, kind of a challenge I always have at the beginning here is that by the time we're done with this presentation, kind of my goal when you're finished today, if I did what I want to do, I want you to be able to start your path for planning your APW deployment. And that requires kind of, I think, 3 key things. One is just understanding the capabilities of APW, and then understand what's required to deploy. What are the steps? What are the considerations? What are the business process? What's some sysadmin stuff, et cetera. And ultimately, too, also is understanding the business value, because if you understand the business value, you can communicate it to your users and you can gain sponsorship for your efforts. So I think that's really important to kind of, when we finish through this, I'd like to say at the end of this, let's check into this and make sure we've got all 3 done. So let's start off with a few questions, right? We always like to gauge our attendees' transformation journey. And so the first question we're going to ask is, how do you see your digital transformation? Kind of a scale 1 to 4, really. Good results. Good feedback coming in. Thank you. Okay, let's stop the poll here and look at the results. So as expected, we have a lot of people that are just getting started, but it's going slower than expected, which is common because it is a transformation. It's quite an effort. There's a lot involved, a lot of process, a lot of technology, organizations involved, right? I'm excited to see there's some, seeing progress, right? In other words, your progress, your planning, and you're starting to see good results. And it's nice also to see a few that have really good and see good results. At the very beginning here, we do see some people have not started, and that's not uncommon because it's quite an effort to get started. And depending on where you sit in the organization, sometimes that transformation isn't, on the radar. Okay, so let's go on to the next one here. The next question is, how do you see? How do you see your planning process? There you go. Is it kind of manual? Is your planning process, is it moving? Is it moving slowly, but you're getting out of all manual, or you've got a combination, or you streamlining or automated? That's what APW steps in for, is to help improve that planning process. Okay, that's a good one. You get in the poll now. So results here, interesting, close to what I kind of expected. That there's quite a few that have processes that are manual. And so that's the first thing I'd say is take a look at APW, see if you can streamline that process a bit, right? Get out of the manual, bring these records in, organize them, and do some planning, right? Again, slowly, but we're moving out of the manual process a little bit, right? We had this session a couple weeks ago, and the same result. I had 0 in fully automated. So I guess that's something, is a real target, but no one's there yet. Okay, and the third one is around goals. Are you linking your planning process? Are you linking your activity and your business plans to company goals? Not using goals, or a few linked, or maybe you've got them linked, but you're not using targets, or we're linking both goals and targets. Okay, that's good. So in this one too, interesting. So common to see organizations have goals, but is it linked to all work? Generally not. And is their targets aligned to that? So I would say, the first three there, right? The core of them is the first three of, we're using a few goals, but not necessarily linked to work. And I think that's the key thing to understand on APW, is you're now able to take that work and link it to company goals, whether they're enterprise goals or portfolio goals or whatever, but you've got a goals framework, which will be real key. All right. So that's it. Thank you for the polls. We'll move on now to the next part of the session here. So let's do a look at value drivers of APW. And by the way, thank you for your participation in the survey. It's always nice to kind of see the results. Helps us kind of focus in on what next sessions might be about. So we look at the value drivers of APW, right? However, first thing I want to call out is this session today is about 4.1, Alignment Planner Workspace 4.1. There is a new release 5 out that just came out very recently, but most of the information and the screens and so forth were all about 4.1 today, all right? So as you begin, we mentioned earlier about your digital transformation. We ask about that transformation, what's happening in your transformation. And as your transformation progresses, you'll discover a need for strategic planning as part of the innovate, build, run cycle, right? So then the question is, well, where does APW fit in that? APW fits in this plan cycle, right? It's about the planning for the enterprise. You really want to think about it. It really is. APW is all about planning for the enterprise. So as you transform, think about your planning and how that weaves its way into the whole transformation. So if we're in the planning cycle, right, and our value is plan build, the cyclical plan build operate service, right? And as you click through that and you think about, what does this look like? What does plan look like? Well, there's where Alignment Planner Workspace shows up. It's about that planning cycle. It supports strategic planning for the full value cycle. And so you think about APW, what it really does is helps you plan your business outcomes for all of your work, whether that's waterfall work or agile work. It helps you plan all that work. Then you say, okay, so from a business perspective, business unit perspective in ServiceNow, what's driving our APW build? Like what is it? What are some important market trends that are driving us? A key one is supporting the alignment of all work to business strategy. So you know the work you're working on is critical, the outcomes the business is dependent on, right? We want to make sure we have a flexible planning architecture, which helps support your transformation from, say, a traditional waterfall to, say, maybe a product-centric portfolio management, right? So enable this business agility and how you change the ways and methods of your planning. And then the last one down here is about trends around useful information, right? How do we get trends and information in your hands and simplify the experience? So when you simplify the experience, that's about adoption. You want your organization to adopt and get value out of it. So key thing is for us is to have modern and powerful insights. So how do you connect? How do you connect your business strategy to your critical work? What's this flow look like? All right, Alignment Planner brings together the strategy layer, the execution layer, and this is actually how it does it, right? So the strategy, alignment, delivery, and the first one is about planning, the high-level planning. So utilizing goals, strategic planning, roadmap planning, it links to the work, and this work is linked to strategy. So you got this top layer of strategy. The next layer is alignment. Make sure that what I'm looking at and the work that I'm seeing is aligned to your business strategy. So this is really the heart kind of APW sits in here. This main layer here is in the middle. Goals are more sitting at the top, right? And then, well, where does all this work get represented? It gets represented in the delivery layer. So no matter what type of work you're doing, no matter what type of tool you have deployed, whether it's waterfall or agile or both or hybrid work or hybrid project work, that delivery layer is feeding the planning layer, which is feeding the strategy layer. So it's top down and bottoms up. So that's the key thing around how do you link these things together? And you do it with Alignment Planner Workspace. So then you look and kind of step back at this is what they call the capability map. And we offer a wide range of capabilities in SPM, right? Today, we're going to be talking about, in particular, SPM. And SPM is this layer on the left here. It's around portfolio prioritization, road mapping, and goals, right? And so, but how does APW work? Like, what does it use? Well, it relies on entities or execution records that sit in Agile and sit in project portfolio. So it's using project and demand, and it's using Agile. Now, when I say Agile, it could be using SAFe or it could be using this Scrum Agile 2.0. Right, so that's the key thing about what does it consume, what does it use? This here, Tony mentioned about forward-looking statement. This is one I'll mention that as we look of what APW does today and what it's going to be doing in the future, again, we have some of its capabilities in the product today. Like you think about scenario planning. Well, we do scenario planning in PPM, in project portfolio. Well, eventually we'll have the scenario planning capabilities within APW also, right? And funding and innovation management, there's some really kind of new features coming out later next year around innovation, kind of a re-architecting of innovation. So there's a lot on the roadmap for APW, but I want to mention of the full breadth of everything that sits with SPM, APW uses these components for the planning cycle. Right, so I mean, what's the driver, right? Visibility, prioritization, and alignment. Visibility, if you're sitting as a portfolio manager, depending on your persona, you get visibility across all this work. And as you look at all the work, you can prioritize the work and move things around. Prioritize based on teams, based on drivers, based on roadmap, based on key events, right? And then you can begin to do alignment. And that's the key thing. Really, that's the key drivers, the value drivers. It gives you the ability to do all three of these things. And the objectives, right? Clearly, deliver the outcomes. That's what the business expects, right? So plan against the business strategy, deliver those outcomes. The teams have a clear path. The teams can see what work's being done. They can see where it is, how it's being prioritized. And you get to, again, can't restate this enough, right? You get to align your work to your business goals. And hopefully the objective here is you make informed decisions. We'll have an example here in the demo where I'll show you where I would consider an informed decision. You're looking at the roadmap and you're making some decisions. All right. So let's now step into concepts, and workspace navigation. So there's a lot of concepts here. I want to go through all these here, but I want to point out three. Right? And again, this is available in the back. There's a catalog that describes all these particular concepts in the back, and it's available on our community site, which has all this information also. And again, this full deck will be available for you, so don't worry about not being able to reference it. But I want to point out three key things. First is a planning hierarchy. You'll structure, when you look at APW, you'll structure a method of planning, whether it's waterfall or hybrid or pure agile if you wanted to, right? So you'll come up with a structure, and we provide templates for that. Then you'll determine what your organization is planning. Like, what type of organization? Is it a business unit, department? Is it the enterprise? And what's the hierarchy to this? What does it look like? What's the organizational work? It's kind of who. It's kind of how am I planning, a hierarchy, and then who. And then planning items I want to call up, because that effectively is the work that's being pulled in from the execution items. So it's pulling in the agile stories, or I'm sorry, epics. It's pulling in demands and projects. It's pulling in data from those records, and they call them planning items. It's an integration, and they create a planning item, and that's what's used for APW, right? And there's many more things. We'll cover goals later. There's ad hoc, there's workspace, et cetera, right? So let's talk a little bit about key concepts around the roles, right? There's a baseline set of roles provided in the application that you need to do setup, right? These roles are specific to user activities and responsibilities. There's a technical role definition in the back of the presentation that will give you a guideline, and is also included in the getting started kit. As you can see here, we support personas from executive to product owners, to project owners, to administrators, right? So we support the executive alignment to roadmap and business strategy. We support the product owner alignment to organization goals. We support project owners and project managers who work on the work items. And of course, there's an admin function, so you can do setup and management of the application. So there's a whole set of roles, and there's a set of roles and groups that come with this as part of setup. All right. So I want to mention the guided setup too. The guided setup is provided. There's 5 major components to the guided setup, and then there's some optional components. But basically, this is, like I said, there's lots of information we're going to give you of how to go through the setups, but there's a guided setup also. And there's templates, there's how to set up the planning organization, the users and roles we mentioned here, the tables, the planning item table is part of the integration. And then, of course, you want to validate your data and so forth, right? And depending if you're using goals, if you have additional nodes, if you're using agile integration or ADO integration, there's some guided setup there too. But it'll let you know that we give you lots of tools to help set up and guide you through the build of APW for you. So you think about the integration, right? And how does this work? We mentioned this concept of Alignment Planner looks at PPM and Agile, the blue and the yellow. And when it looks at that, it brings in information. So APW is as a global, as a scoped app, but it's looking at PPM and Agile. So translate this model into what it looks like for the product. So the top visual is Alignment Planner, the roadmap view. Sitting in the blue line here is an example of demand management. This is a scoring on a scoreboard. There's the new project workspace. And sitting down here, I think, is a visual of a Scrum program. So we're using information out of epics, projects, and demands to do integration to roll up to APW. So the planning hierarchy, right? You'll set up a hierarchy, how you want to plan. So you'll set these organizations. And this is, I would say, probably a big chunk of work when you think about setting up APWs is understanding how it works and how you want to structure your organization and your hierarchy. So for the demonstration today, I'm going to go through how to set this up. And we're going to set up the demo example is I'm going to set up a portfolio, and we're going to have demand, projects, and epics in that. So I'm going to use the template for Agile, the Agile template. It's actually a hybrid template, but there's a straight PPM template, there's a hybrid template, and there's an Agile only template. So again, we provide you a template how to do this, but I'll go through and set this up today. So another key concept is planning state. So think about all the information that sits in project demand and epic. And depending on your integration, what you pull, all this information comes into APW. Well, that could be an awful lot of information, right? You can imagine, maybe thousands and thousands of records. Well, how do I work within APW to make sure that I'm looking at only what I want to work with? That's called prioritization. So think about say a Scrum backlog or something. You're always kind of grooming the backlog and moving things around and ranking and hierarchy and all that. Same thing with APW. You get to do the same concept. You get to work through what's new, what just showed up, something that's in review. Maybe something that's in review is being staged for prioritization. Once you move something to prioritization, that's when it shows up on the roadmap. So there may be a lot of things that you're looking at, but on the roadmap itself, it's stuff that's in prioritization. And it's kind of a visual of that. When you look at the nav, right? This is an example. I'm picking a portfolio, I'm picking HR. The backlog has all this information in it. But when I want to look at the roadmap, boom, this is what I look at, right? Because I sit in prioritization. So let's go through a little bit of navigation here, right? This is a real high level view. Again, 4.1. It's changed a little bit in 5, but this is 4.1. You've got your main navigation, the roadmap in the middle here. You've got detail on every execution item. You can create dependencies, right? So these are the execution records. You see the little bars. And then, of course, on the side over here is where you move between, say, I want goals, I want to look at my backlog, I want to look at my roadmap. Those are different views, right? So let's step through more detail here. So I don't know if you're familiar with the new UI, San Diego Forward. We've got workspaces. And you'll see the workspace here on the left. And if you click workspace, you'll be able to move between workspaces, which is going to be really cool as you think about it. More and more items are moved to workspaces. You'll be able to just nav right to workspaces. So I want to work in Alignment Planner Workspace. I want to work in Project Workspace. You know, there may be lots of other workspaces in the future. You'll be able to move between them. So it makes navigation and user-friendly. It's much faster and easier. So as I step through this here, this is the full nav on the right over here. This is where you do your planning. You'll pick the portfolio or ad hoc, right? You'll pick your organization and you'll pick what within the organization. Okay, I want to pick a portfolio. I'm going to pick HR portfolio, right? And you've got your menu here. I mentioned that the menu here. And when you think about the roadmap, right? So the roadmap, this is the core main item, and you'll see at the very top up here. I'm sorry, I'm going to back up one here. Anyway, I missed that. The dates are on the roadmap. You see underneath HR roadmap, you'll see a set of dates. You'll be able to define what you're looking at within the framework, because you may be bringing in records that span a couple of years possibly, right? So here's milestones. You can have milestones at the roadmap level, and you can have them obviously the execution level. So you'll have roadmaps, and you can kind of link these things together. Personalization, a lot of personalization is available in this app, which is really nice. You get to group by and sort by and filter, and it's all personal for you as a user, right? Which is really nice. Execution items I mentioned in the bar in there, they have information that allows you to expand it, contract it. You can see stuff in the execution item. So this really effectively is referencing, since it's yellow, and you can change the colors too, by the way. But yellow here for this demonstration is an epic. It's referencing a specific epic. If you click on the track mode, this is where all this other additional information shows up. So in personalize, let's go through a quick personalization here. So this is color by, I'm sorry, group by. So this is grouped by, here we're looking by type, right? And major feature, right? So we're grouping by priority goals here, this one example. And then we can color by. So this is a very key part to know about when you're asking your users how they want to visualize things. We give you some basics out of the box. We give you a lot of them actually, but you may have your own personal fields that you want to bring in and say, hey, I want to group by some unique thing, unique attribute that's part of your business. So you want to incorporate that as part of your design. So show in the bars, what do I show in the bars, right? Highlights, milestones we mentioned here, right? Event milestones too. You can have event milestones. You can create your own milestones. Milestones come in from the execution items, but you can also create milestones against the roadmap items themselves. You get dependencies, which is really key. You can link things together and see how dependencies affect what the roadmap looks like. Again, there's a legend at the bottom, so you can see what the colors mean, right? So the track mode. So right now I have track mode on. So click the little thing at the top, gives you track mode. And when I do that, I can start to see all this information in the execution items. So I can see % complete. I can personalize my bar, what I want to see inside these track items, right? I can see status, maybe status being pulled in, right? And I can see financials. Depending on what financials are available and how you're using financials, you can pull in financials. So when you click on track mode, you suddenly can see all this additional information, including the % complete and financials and so on. So on goals, navigation on goals, right? You think about where you are on looking and setting up goals. So if you want to do the goal framework, first, okay, I want to create a goal. You can set new goals. You can do them at the portfolio or enterprise level. Here, example is the portfolio level. I'm going to set some goals for the HR organization, right? So I set 2 new goals. This is where you track your progress, right? And you can put in actuals. There's also a way to automate some of the collection of the actuals to track the progress. Here you can define what shows up in the individual columns. So you got personalization in the bars. This is where you see your status. You can set status, or you can have status go by progress, right? And there's widgets at the top. Since these are individual portfolio goals against HR, Acme's the company that HR belongs to. So these roll up to a total Acme enterprise set of goals. So you may have goals at the enterprise that roll down into a portfolio, but I want to show you that this information does roll up and talks about, hey, there may be 3 key big rocks or big initiatives that sit in Acme, and these things roll up to that, into those widgets. And you can also create, this is where you create against a goal, right? You can create targets, you can create new targets. This is also where, if you wanted to, you could say, hey, I want to make sure my work's aligned to the goal. There's kind of different ways to do alignment. But here you can say, hey, this is the goal. Let's go pick the items that belong to that. And of course, you can delete it if you have permission. And the backlog. Okay, the backlog, I mentioned, this is all the activity you have defined in the integration. It brings it all in for you, right? So in the backlog, again, this is where you find it. This is where you see the status of the item. So you can, again, you can prioritize and group things as you want, but this is where prioritization shows up. Since these items are prioritized, they'd show up on my roadmap. But you can see things are in work, they're new, done, canceled, so on, right? Dates. This talks about specific dates, because remember, when you think about APW, it's going to want to use dates. What are my ranges? What am I working from, these dates? You do bring in the dates from your execution records, and then you have a set of dates you manage also. And depending on how you want to configure it, it can push those dates back, and you can inform the project manager or the Scrum Master or something like that, that we've had a proposed date change against something coming out of the planning cycle, right? And this is also priority goals. This is where you do your alignment. So we can see here an example. There's some things that are not aligned to goals. So this is a key thing of what are we working on? Is it prioritized? Is it aligned to strategy, right? And the ranking. You can do all the ranking too. And you can create new planning items. You can create planning items right here. Your integration might bring planning items, but you can also create your own, which effectively is saying I'm creating a planning item that's not related to a demand project or Epic. It's a standalone planning item. So you can say, I don't want to do integrations. I just want to do planning by itself. You can do that. So some customers have done that. Then they learn how it works and they step into the integrations, right? So the ad hoc roadmap is a way to go through and say, hey, I want to create against a single table. I want to look at some information. I want to look at, this is the ad hoc, right? I want to create a filter. I'm going to look at just projects as an example here. I'm looking at just projects that haven't started yet. So I'm kind of want to look at what might be in the pipeline for HR projects. So I have these filters set. This is what my roadmap would look like. So it's basically going out, picking, grabbing, pulling it in, and giving you a visualization. But it's against one table, right? It's not like a portfolio. It just goes against a specific table. You can do that. That's what ad hoc is. Okay. So I think I'm close to being on schedule here. We're ready for demonstration. I guess I'd pause here and see if there's any questions before I step in demonstration. Tony or anybody want to jump in maybe before I head into demonstration?
Scott, there came a question about APW strategy plans and initiatives and how they relate to APW goals. Do you want to answer that live?
Yeah, so initiatives, so you can create an initiative, right? And goals is a separate entity. It's a way to track, right? So you may have a high level set of initiatives, and underneath that initiative, to achieve that, you may define goals against it. And goals can be tracked, right? And that's the whole purpose of it, is I have a goal and you can create, and you can have sub goals, by the way, so you could have a nested environment, and you can create the targets, right? Where an initiative is kind of a block. It's like a grouping, it's a high level block. Hopefully that helped.
Thank you.
All right. So let's step into some demonstrations here. So I have these demonstrations. We'll go through kind of setup, workplace, and integrations. So we have some setup, the planning architecture, some workspace, right? So we'll go through each one of these, and I'll comment as we kind of go through what these are, right? So the first one is the plugin. How do I get started, right? So how do I get started is, well, you go to the ServiceNow store, and you type in Alignment Planner. And you'll note too also that when you type in, sometimes you'll see things that are what they call in product. You'll see a little note that says in product. It means they're actually in product, right? But here's Alignment Planner Workspace, right? And we're going to be use the 2.0 because it has the integration, right? You can request the install, right? Since I did the demonstration in one of my environments, I've already requested it. So that you can look at the information, open it up, look at it, what the dependencies are. You can go to docs from here. There's a lot of information you can go from here, right? I mean, this is how you get it. This is a kind of a sysadmin function. And so they'll request it. Sysadmin will get a note that says it's been provisioned for your instance. Once it's provisioned, your sysadmin will go in their instance. Yep, right here, go to your instance, and you'll search on the available products, and you'll find Alignment Planner, and that's effectively how you do your install. Right, since it is a store app, you'll go out and grab it. This is also, by the way, how you do your updates. And you'll see it at 4.1's been installed. And it'll say that there might be other updates available, like when 5.0 is available, right? This is sysadmin function, right? That's how you go get it. You go to the store. Right, next one is the guided setup. So in the guided setup, you want to go to Alignment Planner. Let's just search alignment, probably the fastest way to get to it, right? And go to your guided setup. And you'll see in the guided setup, there's all sorts of steps. Remember, we mentioned the 5 steps, right? And there's steps in each section. It talks about what's in the section, what to configure. Once you've configured it, you can click on, hey, it's complete. But just let you know, there's a whole area, and a lot of the apps have guided setups, but there's a whole area that helps you figure out what steps I need to take. And again, we provide, as part of this, you'll see a getting started kit at the back that has workshops and lots of information about how to conduct and build out your planning hierarchies and planning organization and so forth, right? So in here, like this, I'm going to click on the planning hierarchy. I can see what it is. I can say, okay, here's how getting started, right? And if you click on configure, this is kind of a sysadmin function again, but this is where you go into configure. You can create your own here. But remember what I mentioned, we provide templates for you. So I'm going to use the hybrid template here, right? So what it does is here, it fills in the planning organization and planning items. It kind of fills in the integration definitions for you. Instead of having you create them, it creates them for you. And you notice the methodology is Scrum because it's hybrid, right? So we're picking both of these, it's going to run. And so now you've created that planning organization, right? And if you go back to the guided setup, you can see where, hey, I've completed that, right? And you can actually see it. If you go to the planning organization, the guided setup, and you go to planning organization, you can see a planning hierarchy, sorry. You can see this one example, right? You can see how I did a setup. So it really depends on how you want to set things up, what your structure is. Again, this isn't done often. It's part of the initial setup, and you mark complete, right? Again, all defined in the guided setup for you. So next one I want to run through is roles. And in roles, you first want an alignment planner, right? And go click on roles. And again, this is a sysadmin function. This is common throughout the platform. So anyone who's a sysadmin knows how to do groups and roles and stuff would know how to do this. But this is going in specifically finding the roles that come with APW. And their service SN_align is the actual one you want. You search it, and you can apply to this particular group. So I've applied this role to this group. You can also, of course, add members directly. It's always nice to do it through roles, but you can do it individually, add some people specifically. I'm going to add this person, Megan, who's the persona for the portfolio manager. One thing I want to mention, skills. I actually created a skills group that references ability for a person to understand how to use APW. So you could use skills to say, hey, before I roll out something on, people need to have training and things like that. So I can use skills as an example, say, hey, you could do that anywhere really, but someone who could knows how to use APW and say, yeah, they're authorized, again, if you're using skills. And here I'm going to log in, personate Megan, right? So in Megan should see, as a result of doing the assignment, she's also on a couple of portfolios as the owner. Megan should be able to go up and say, hey, I want to find my workspace. right? I could do favorites, but let's go to Workspace, as I mentioned earlier. Let's go to Workspace, Alignment Planner Workspace. Bingo, there's her roadmap, right? Because we've assigned it. She's also the owner. Of course, you need to be owner to see some things. Okay. So there's an example of roles and how to do role definitions, right? Next, let's move on to the integrations. And as I mentioned on integrations, so we provide a lot of information for you. This is a copy, an example of Alignment Planner Workspace and the Getting Started Kit. I think it's honestly like 112 slides here. It's a PowerPoint. To conduct workshops in your organization. It's kind of a preset set of templates to go through and ask questions and prepare for the structure, right? So we give you a lot of information in preparation for doing and setting up the planning hierarchy, right? So once you grab the information, know how you want to plan, let's look at creating the planning hierarchy, right? Again, you need to do workshops before that to understand how you want to plan. So guided setup, planning hierarchy. Again, remember I mentioned we have templates provided. So a PPM template, a hybrid template. Here, I'm going to pick the hybrid, right? So again, we mentioned before how this is set up, creates this automatically. Those are the integrations. And the sysadmin is going to want to understand the integrations because there may be things that you want to change in integrations in the future, or bring in new fields or bring in information that's unique to the execution records. And you do that with the preferences on those integrations. But here, an example, I'm setting up the planning hierarchy, right? I think we showed this quickly earlier, a little earlier, but here's an exact demo of it. So mark complete, right? So the next one, let's go on to the planning org. So now that we've kind of created how we want to plan, and we're doing hybrid planning here, let's create an organization, like the structure around who's going to be doing the planning. So again, go to alignment, go down to your organization. Again, you could do this through guided setup too, a couple of different ways to do it. But here I'm going to do an organization, and I'm going to do a portfolio. We give you structures, templates of what types of planning organizations there are. Just like we do for the hierarchies, we give you templates. We also give you templates around structure and setup of your organizations. And here you can determine what the planning hierarchy is going to be, you're going to use. So this is an example of, hey, I want to set up an HR and I want to have hybrid planning, right? So this is basically saying I'm going to be using hybrid planning for this structure. You know, by the way, I put work notes in here just as a note that you can do these kind of things about why it was set up and who set it up and when they set it up and so forth, right? I think I have a demonstration here, a demo. Yeah, it's down at the bottom here of demo. And there's just the visualization of the HR demo is my planning organization. And I mentioned it's complete here. You'll see like, hey, I've set this up. It's for this group. Here's what we did. You may have other people that want to know and collaborate with you. Like effectively, I'm building this for Megan, right? Megan wants this hierarchy set up for organizations, how she's going to do her planning. All right. So there's the planning organization. Now let's do roadmap preferences. And I mentioned roadmap preferences is where you set up what you might want to bring in the integration. And a good example of that is, hey, I have a custom field. I think my example here is this integration. I want to bring in area. I think I brought in location, I think is what I brought in here. And so I want to be able to group by location, right? As an example. And location's available, but I wanted to have it in the group by or color by area, right? And so I need to add it. Be sure to note that when you do this, that you're in the right update set when you do this information, because there's several, because there's different components to make sure you're in the right update set. But I'm going to do group by, and I want to group by location. So I'm going to find location, and I'm going to move it over. This is, typical configuration. So I'm adding location to the integration, which means the location now will be available as part of my, when I do my roadmap, when I do preferences. I'll be able to see it and do it by location. And again, this is not out of the box field location. You may have your own that you want to bring in, right? You always do. It's guaranteed. Someone's going to ask for, I want to group by a unique characteristics in some business unit or some geography or, some planning component that's not out of the box. It's your own fields, which is common, right? So that's roadmap preferences. Now let's move on to planning items. And remember, planning items are the items that are part of the integration. We bring in all the data off of projects, epics, and demands, right? So your planning items is effectively a table that holds all that information and does the relationships between those items. So effectively, it's looking at the execution item, it's bringing certain information into the planning items table, and this is what APW uses. It uses this information. It does kind of this translation, it adds new values, it puts in dates, it does relationships, right? It's a lot of information that it brings in and uses. And again, the integration sits behind here real time. So if I update something in the roadmap, or I'm over in project and someone makes a change in project, it's real time. You'll be referenced immediately because it's an internal integration. Right? And again, this is all the planning items that are brought in as part of the integration. We saw this before. There could be a lot of information in here. And you may want to group and sort by this kind of information in the backlog, right? So you can drag and drop and do things like that, right? But this is how you look at planning items and what's in the planning items. And you see, again, it's the table view in the back end, but on the application here, this is where you see the backlog. All right, so navigation. Actually, let me go through navigation here. We did some of this already, but here's kind of a click through of how you pick the portfolio. Remember, you can collapse and get more real estate against this, right? Here's where I pick a portfolio, an enterprise, depending on what your organization type is. I'm sticking in the HR SPM demo, the portfolio. Here's my goals, backlog, and roadmap. And then this is the date piece I mentioned to you. You might want to understand how dates come in, right? And what your date ranges are. And this basically groups into your view what you want to work with. And depending on the scale of that, this is where you're going to want to say, hey, I want to see my groupings by month or quarter or year. This is a track mode, right? We saw the track mode, right? This is the owner. This is kind of updating information against this organization. If you're the owner, comments, attachments, things like that, right? Kind of the standard stuff. Right. And this is where you do month, quarter, year. So depending on what your range is, I may decide to plan in quarters. Depending on how you have your roadmap items sitting, you might want to plan, kind of hard to plan by month if you got 4 years out there, right? You want to do it a different way. This is, I do the group by. Here we have group by primary goal, which is over here, right? And we have color by type. So I'm grouping by the main objective of the portfolio. And I want to say, hey, I want to do that, but I also want priority. Here's an example of a quick change and say, hey, I want to add another one. I think you can add 3 in there. But it's very personalizable, which is really nice. So you can group by and color by to give you that contextual visualization of how you want to work. Showing bars, don't show in bars, right? Milestone. There's a milestone only click, right? I think it's coming up here where you might want to look only in the world of milestones. And so I can see milestones, I can move milestones, I can see what they are. These are item milestone and roadmap milestones. Here's your milestone only view. So some people like to look at, okay, I just want to see the major items as they happen. You got the milestone only view. And dependencies, right? I want to see dependencies, I don't. They want to work for dependencies, get them active, let me see them. I can see the visualization of them and I can see the bars. So the little icons, if you got an issue, and then the bars move between them, right? So there's the item detail. As soon as I click on an item, an execution item, it brings up the information and details. I can look at the milestones that sit within that item. And of course, more, you can do dependencies. I can add comments, attachments. This is looking at that one record. Right? So if I have unscheduled items, if I plan unscheduled items, and this is where you do the filtering. If you, as we noticed, say, for instance, I have a demand that gets converted to a project. Well, I want to bring that demand in. I want to bring the project in. All right. So this is like filter certain things in and out to make sure that it works right. All right. So that's the navigation in the backlog, right? So we get to backlog. This is where you change what's in review or prioritization. Remember, I mentioned prioritization is when something gets put in the roadmap. As soon as I do that, it's going to show in the roadmap. Okay. And at the bottom down here, we have the legend, right? You can zoom in, zoom out, and you can see what included information for dependencies, and of course, milestones, achieved, not achieved, what the colors mean. Right? So it's very personalizable. Navigation's easy and quick. It's very responsive. It's a users should really like it. It's a nice, really functional app. Nice to use. All right. So let me move on to the next one here. Let's get into dependencies. This is where you say, hey, I've got a dependency between a couple items. And so you pick your dependent item and say, hey, I've got a relationship between a demand and this relates to something else. Like I have a dependency and a demand. So I create the dependency. What's it related to? You can do in organization, like HR is your organization. I can also do outside. I could link this to an IT, or I could link it to something different, a completely different organization, right? Which is really nice because you can bring this information and see relationships to other items. Here I'm looking for, I'm searching for probably HRIS, I'm guessing, or no, annual comp, okay? So I'm creating a relationship between this demand and annual comp, right? So now you see a new relationship established, shows you dependency, and you can get into the dependency and change information in dependency too, right? So you can navigate into it. This is like going into the details. I can get into full details, like example here. I can go look at all the information on the dependency, much more detailed dependency. Again, all the functionality you expect. I can comment. You may have information you're sharing between the owners of these items. You may share back and forth work notes and stuff on what the dependencies are and why it's there and so forth, right? Just got a lot of functionality in terms of like, besides just identifying it, who do I want to notify and why? Okay, so milestones. So you can set milestones at a planning item level and a top roadmap level. And there's an example of the top roadmap level. You can drag and drop. There's different types and different colors. So you can set a date, a key date, a milestone date, and these are a launch date, right? And depending on what status they're in, the color change. This is an upcoming one as an example, right? A budget cycle, FY23 budget cycle looks like it's due on the 17th. You know, you can change the status eventually if you missed it or not. And you can, again, these are all drag and drop too. You can move these things around, just literally pick them up and drag and drop them around. So you can create new milestones. Hey, I just got a new milestone. What is it going to be? You know, HR system, probably launch date, right? HR system launch. It's going to be a launch date. I think that's the rocket. You pick that, you put a date in, kind of letting everybody know who's working on this roadmap. This is the important date to be aware of. You submit it, and there it is. It's a launch date. Again, like I said, you can drag and drop it. You can just pick it up and move it if you want to. But it's nice to see kind of these vertical lines against activity, against all of the roadmaps, right? Which helps you understand, hey, besides the individual items, what are major activities happening? Budget activities, you know, portfolio activities, planning activities, all sorts of things like that, right? Here's how I create a new milestone. You can do it directly from here, right, too. Kind of another way to do it. Besides just on the bar, you can go in and do it right from the side nav, too. Create an important date. I need some approvals, a key approval date, right? Something happening important on the 22nd, you know, right? And again, you also need to know that you can go change the status from upcoming to achieved or missed, which will change. I think I have one red one over here, star over here. We missed some important key date, but you get to see that. All right. So that's milestones. Let's look at the milestones for planning items, for roadmap planning items, right? So you'll see here, there's the items here. I've got some dates. I want to look at the planning items. You can see, I think. Messed up my milestone here. Yeah, I've already gone through this, sorry. So let's get, now that we've done milestones, let's get into a planning example here. And the planning example I have is, you can see number one here. It says we've got an annual comp demand. It's supposed to, it's actually a little bit late, hasn't started yet. I also have HRIS automation. That's an Epic. And I'd like to be able to link the two and move, but I need to hold the launch date, number 3, the launch date. So I have a launch date I have to hold to. In other words, can I compress this demand and give it off to the HRIS team? It's kind of like looking at relationships between items, dependencies, and dates. So let's look at that use case example. So I picked the portfolio, I picked the roadmap, right? I'm going to look at the two items that are related. So annual comp, HRIS, right? I'm looking at this information. I can see a red. I've got a problem here, dependency problem. It highlights it for you. I'm probably going to go turn on track mode because I want to see where they are, right? I can see each one of these information. I can open them up. I can look at them. I can hover over them. Turn on track mode. And what I'll learn here is that the HRIS Epic is a little ahead of schedule. So maybe the team isn't as booked and they're ahead of schedule. In other words, can I take this demand and move it out? Right? Can I hold the date, the launch date, and can I hold the approval date? That's effectively what I'm doing, right? There's a budgeting activity coming up too. So there's another important date that I need to know. Can I do this? So effectively, I need to go into I need to kind of have a conversation between the two owners of these two items. You could be the owner of both of them too, by the way. So I look at the milestones, I look at the activities, I look at information. Again, this is looking at the dependency. The annual comp itself, the Epic. Right. So I can look at this information. Again, you'll see at the top there, I got dependencies and goals and all sorts of stuff I can link to, right? So here I'm going to look at this dependency, right? And here's where I probably want to have a conversation. I've kind of mocked this conversation up, but I mocked the conversation up to say, hey, I'm asking the owner, what can we move this, right? Owner comes back, Megan comes back and says, yeah, it looks like we could do this, right? We can move this. So we've got agreement between two owners. Then it's now bound to Brian Marshall. Hey, Brian's the demand manager. Hey, Brian, what do you think? Can we move this? Because if I move it on the roadmap, it doesn't automatically move the demand. It'll move some dates that Brian can see on the demand as demand manager, right? So I'm going to change, as the owner of this portfolio, I'm going to change the dates here, right, of this demand that we agree to dates, right? So when I do this, and I move the dates, you can drag and drop this too, but you'll see this move now. So I now have more of an alignment of coming off of the Epic onto the new demand. But then I also need to make sure that the demand owner, Marshall, he's aware. And so I'll make sure that he's familiar with the dates. Like we had an agreement, but he also needs to understand his dates, right? So I need to notify the demand manager. Demand manager can go in and change his actual dates. And this example here is, you'll notice there's start date and APW, the start date, right? You have the start dates, but you see there's a variance between them. One is the demand date, the other is the APW's dates. And we had an agreement, we're going to change it. Brian Marshall says, yes, I've agreed to it, which means now Brian Marshall can go in and actually change his start date. It doesn't automatically change that start date. It will give Brian a notification that there's a variance, right? Which is really nice. It's a nice way to say I'm trying to plan. It helps with communication, helps with tracking and audit and so forth like that, right? So now he's moved it. He's changed his dates. He may end up changing some of his milestone dates possibly, right? So now this is an example of how you might, in a real world use case, use APW. Again, all the setups and all that, but what's the value, right? It's finding where you can do these moves because I have an Epic that's a little ahead of schedule. Good, let's try to take advantage of that. Can I move this up, still hold my dates, right? And here I can put in as a result of the final, hey, I type in, Brian might go into this and type in. If he did it on his demand, it would show up here anyway, right? Work notes carry across between both, right? So that's the end of this use case on how you might use APW. One example of how you might use APW use case, right? So let's do a little navigation in the backlog. Oops, sorry. So in the backlog, remember I mentioned this is all items that are in the backlog, and depending on your prioritization state, here they're ranked. I ranked them here. And you notice we have prioritized, we have number 5, that's sitting in review. And it's like pretty high ranked. It's got a high priority, the priority is high. It's a project. So the question is, does it belong in a roadmap? Is it something we want to consider? It doesn't have a primary goal, right? So like, okay, maybe it's not something we want to work on because it's not aligned with the goal. But I want to show you, this is what all the information you get to see. Like what state, and by the way, they all come in state of new, and you move them to under review, and then you might move them to, of course, prioritization. So it's kind of like a stepping stone. But again, you can do all this ranking. You can grab and move things around. You can group things and move things for rankings. So it's a drag and drop, click, drag and drop, move around. So you can re-rank things. You can also use typical capabilities in a new nav, the navigations and workspaces. You can pick the columns and drag and drop and you may have like hundreds of things you're working on. Hey, I may want to focus only on, say, prioritization of items that are in review. And in other words, I kind of want to work just with this item instead of everything, instead of scrolling down like, hey, I just want to work within items that are in review or prioritization or something like that, right? And so you can expand and okay, now I'm kind of starting, just like in APW, I'm starting to group things together and work within the groupings. And here I may say, hey, I want to bring in prioritization. What are the items? So I'm going to say, hey, group by the type, and then I want to group by the prioritization. So now it's in review, and I want to look at the prioritized, and I want to look at by type. So now like, okay, these are all the things that are already prioritized. Let's go a little further down. Let's look at the projects. But I remember the goal here is to look at in review. I want to find that one project that was ranked number 5. Right. So here I can drag and drop things around, but I want to look down. I want to do one review, in review. Hopefully coming up here. There you go. So I'm going to look at that project. So there's everything that's been prioritized in review, right? And I want to get to a project that was in review. And this is where you make your decision to move it to the portfolio. So as soon as I come down to project, and I've got that rank number 5, there it is. It's high, right? And this is where I can say, I can change the status on it and move it into, you could have done it there, or I can do it right here too, where you pick it and you make it prioritized. Again, as soon as I do that, that's what's going to show up in the roadmap. It'll be a new item on your roadmap to consider. All right, next item is backlog state change. This is an example probably where you're going to want to say, hey, I found something, I want to move it, right? So the use case being, I want to move something onto my roadmap, right? I need something new. And this example here is HRIS automation that Epic we talked about. It's coming to an end. Well, what's the team doing next? According to this, we've got some projects in flight, the red. We have some demands ready to be considered, but there's no work. There's nothing. There may be lots of work, but it's not on the roadmap. You can see it. So this is an example of finding that thing and bringing it to the roadmap. So effectively saying, hey, HRS team, this is what your looks like, what you're working on next. Of course, you'd have to do that from an agile perspective too. You have to talk to the Scrum or product owners and so forth to make sure that works. But this is kind of finding and saying, hey, this team's done. Looks like I've got a date, couple of milestone dates, right? What's their next chunk of work? So I'm going to go to the backlog. It's an Epic. I've looked at this Epic here. Go to the backlog. I think I'm probably going to take number 5 again, because that's the one I was working on as an example. Yeah, this onboarding, new hire onboarding one is an example. All right. So I go to look at this one. This is where you're going to go through the information, and it's got a weighted, it's already got weighted, WS to JF weighted, right? It's high weighted, it's priority, it's large, right? This is where you may have a conversation with the owner, in activity logs. Hey, is this ready? Team ready, et cetera. The Scrum process, is everything, stories ready to grow, all that kind of stuff. You're going to go through all that steps, right? And is it related to a goal? I think that's the key thing. It's not related to a goal, so you're going to want to make sure that it is, if it needs to be. Like, it may not always be this case. But now that I've moved it to prioritization, it's now going to show up on my roadmap. There it is. So now you're kind of ready for that team to pick up that piece of work starting in January. And you may, again, start doing dependencies and so forth, right? So there's my example of the backlog state change. I think I'm going through here just showing you different examples of new, things pop up and like, okay, let's consider this for review, right? And you may want to do re-ranking as you do your reviews, right? You can move things up and down. Example of just moving things up. It's like you would do in a typical agile. You're going to do, management of your backlog. All right. And that brings me up to set up the goals. Oops, keep doing that wrong. Let's click the right video here. So here's where the goals, you go into goals, right? And here's where you're going to set up a goal, right? So I'll expand the goals related to HR, right? And you can see as you expand, you see the different types of goals and nested goals underneath it and targets. The top one's the parent. You can have nested in there. So you can do per goal. I can, create targets, create new goals, right? Here, I'm going to create a new goal, right? And the new goal, is for the HR, it's going to be, redesign a training, right? And I'll give it a range. This goal is a target for the full year. Like at the end of the year, I want to have something done for the end of the year. I need to have maybe new training and education systems set up for the year, right? And that's where you create targets, right? So once I have the goal set up, I need to set the metrics. What's the metric? How do I track that I'm actually getting there? So I'm going to set up a target and probably maybe introduction, deployment of some new training apps. Maybe like, say, 4 or 5 new apps that help the training organization, right? So I set a target. It's going to be a number, right? It could be dates, percentages, dollars, any number, any types you can set up here you want. I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to put in, I need to set up, some new applications, right? And this basically is now sets my target. Right? And you can do this, again, for all of them, right? And this is, again, where you make sure you've got to work aligned to that target, right? You want something that, because when you adjust things and complete things, it's going to do updates for you, right? Like I've hit the targets, right? And a base target is 2 to 6, right? Minimum 2, stretch target 6, right? And this is where, and again, I think the next one here is I have where we're going to do, do the actuals. Right, so here I go in and I find the actuals, and here's an example. I put in a couple of actuals. Like I may put in actuals in Q1, maybe a Q2 actual. So that maybe the first time we put it in, I put an actual in of, yeah, we've got 2 deployed out of 6. I still think we're green. We're getting there. We're making progress, right? So, I can put information in the comments and so forth about, what we used, why we came up to this conclusion. And then maybe the end of Q3, something like that. Maybe I put in another value. Again, you can do automation behind this too. There's some more technical steps, but you can do some of this automation. And I know we're adding more capabilities in the future to automate this on the full platform. So you may be looking at HR metrics or service management or ITOM metrics or any number of metrics from other systems. And I think eventually we'll be able to go external. So we'll have integration where you can step out and look at external metrics outside ServiceNow for this, right? Because this is what they really call the goals framework. So here I'm expanded it all, right? So here's how I track against where I am. One of these I'm kind of below target, I'm yellow. One of these, couple of these are green, so the actual value against your target, right? And again, you can go into the details. Remember I mentioned this rolls up, right? Since these targets roll up to the top, I clicked on the enterprise goal of happy customer, right? And I can see all the sub goals that relate to it. Again, it's just a hierarchy, right? So I can, at the enterprise or maybe the initiative layer, right? Enterprise or initiative layer, you can set up real high level goals. But according to where the data is here, I'm 55% complete. Right? All right, that kind of brings me to an end of demonstrations. Let's step into configurations, kind of key things to consider. Configurations kind of like a checklist, right? So again, I mentioned earlier, we have the workshop guides. These will be provided in the guided setup. I'm sorry, the getting started kit on community. Lots and lots. I think there's 20 plus supporting implementation enablement documents out there. And all of these will be referenced, of course, in the getting started kit and community, right? So if you just go into community and type in Alignment Planner getting started, you should find it there. And I think someone might in the chat drop that in the chat now, right? But also, besides this, we have an example. Another example is a process guide. These are only 2 I'm showing you. There's 20 plus out there, videos, all sorts of stuff. This is like a process guide, very detailed process guide. Right? So the steps, right? We went through the install, right? That's kind of a sysadmin function, finding it, doing the install, doing the basic configurations, setting up roles, things like that, right? Then is it more business? You're going to want to understand how to set up your hierarchies, right? Based on how you do planning, what organizations you can do this for. And then once your data starts coming in, you're going to want to make sure you review, configure, and understand the integrations and your planning items. Am I getting the right data? Am I getting my maybe custom data that's coming in? Are all my views right? Can I group by and filter by and sort by and all the milestones coming in? You're going to want to go through all that activity. It shows up in the planning, kind of the setup and review of configuration. And then, of course, depending if you're doing what level of integration you're doing, we're going to take Agile automatically because we're going to look at the epics. But if you have a different setup, say if you're doing Agile off to ADO or off to Jira, you may have a different integration that does some information. There's additional setups, configurations you probably might want to set up, depending on what that looks like. But automatically, if you're using ServiceNow Epic, and again, stories and so forth beneath all that, we'll pull that in automatically for you, right? Again, guided setup takes you through all this. So as I mentioned, guided setup, right? Step by step by step, all available for you, right? So we provide templates. You know, the business and the organization needs to look how you want to do planning, users and roles. Again, we provide templates for a lot of this to help you along with the guided setup. And then you just got to validate the information, and then you do your training and education and do some pilot of this, right? So here's an example of the 4.1 Agile integration. This is the APW Workspace, 4.1, so where to find it. These are the plugins specifically. It's more like a sysadmin view here of what's available and what you're going to need. Actually, effectively what it's doing, it's telling you what it's installing when you grab it. There's another one specifically for safe, right? What you need for safe, this second bullet at the bottom, right? And groups and roles, we walk through groups and roles and how to set that up, right? And make sure you understand if it's sysadmin people that when you're doing configurations, you're in the right update set, because there is core, then there's the app, and there's planning. So you just want to make sure you're in the right component when you're doing your configurations, because if you're not, that can, as you would know, kind of messes you up, especially when you do promote to production. So here's the configurations. We provide these templates, the PPM template, the hybrid template, and the safe template. These are the structures we give to you kind of out of the box. And the goals framework, right? We walk through the goals, how to set up the goals, the configuration of the goals. That really depends how you're doing goals. That's kind of why when you think about the guided setup, it was at the bottom, is because once you understand how you plan, how all these relate to the organization and what the framework is, then that leads to how you might want to do goals. You may not want to do enterprise goals. You may say, hey, listen, I want to, start off with simple goals just against one portfolio. So this kind of helps you step through that process, right? And the configuration, we review this, right? How to set it up, planning step by step. These are the planning organizations and planning hierarchies. This is more of a detailed list in the roles of everything that's incorporated, kind of how they're nested. And if you have a specific thing you want a user to see something specific, this is your map of a sysadmin of how you would map to that, right? Now let's step into some best practices, right? So make sure when you start, you understand your planning hierarchy of how you want to plan, right? That's kind of the key thing, is understanding the hierarchy in your organization. And make sure when you set up your users, how they're going to consume it, how they're going to use the application. So work through some demos and how you think they're going to use it, what the scope and scale of what you want to incorporate, right? If you have any customizations on your execution records, project epics, demands, right? What are those that might be brought in? What are those fields? So make sure you incorporate that. Data quality. So you know what it is, garbage in, garbage out. If your execution records aren't really in good shape or have problems, they're going to manifest themselves in APW. So make sure when you look at the quality of what you're bringing in, which is why oftentimes I say, hey, when you start off here, pick a group, pick a small group, pick a friendly, pick a group that wants to cooperate and participate and drive the adoption of this. And then help work through all the data things that might surface as you bring all this information in, right? So data quality is important. And the filtering, we mentioned about filtering to group by and sort by and all that. Make sure how you understand how they're going to want to use it. Because I've seen, I can't tell how many times where they take out of the box, they're halfway through implementation and someone in the group says, oh, I want to group by, my example was, I want to group by, geography or region or something. Well, those are out of the box. Wait until they say, hey, I want to group by, custom field B, right? After the fact, it wasn't part of your design. So make sure you understand how they think you're going to want to group. So testing, make sure you want to test, right? Just looking at, of course, never do this in prod, do this in sub-dev. Make sure you test your information. Understand the integration, understand the planning records and how they come in and what, the quality of the planning records, right? That's the planning items. And make sure you take advantage of our templates. It's easy to set up, right? Use the templates. And make sure if by any chance you're doing any type of UIB, UI builder configuration on the new workspaces and you're tuning or tweaking the visuals, that you know what you're doing and how to do it, that you want to make sure you map up the views correct. Again, that's a little bit more on the heavy side. but just make sure you understand if you're changing it. And by the way, make sure you update sets and forth where you're changing it. So that's kind of some of the best practices. So lessons learned, right? First thing I want to note is in this release 4.1, there's a term called program. You can set up your hierarchy by program. Program is not the same program you find in PPM, right? It's another way to structure and group. So, and the same thing concept when you think about portfolio. We talk about a portfolio in APW. A portfolio is a grouping of things. Just kind of like it is in a PPM world, when you think portfolio, program, project, the old kind of this traditional more portfolio, it's still a grouping. Over on APW, it's still a grouping too. And I want to mention program because a few people got confused that, hey, I've got program here, I've got program there, what's the difference? Well, it's not the same program. It's just another way to group that you might reference to be called a program, but it's not the program you would find in PPM, right? Custom fields, right? Make sure you know what they are. If you want to bring them in, how they operate, how they show up in execution tables, right? Another key one too is data. When you say, I'm going to bring in, because when you do the integration first time, you want to say, here's the date range. So I pick January 2021 all the way through current period. And I bring it all in and I'm missing stuff. Like, how come I'm missing stuff? Well, when the integration, it goes to look at the created date against that entity record. So if I created a demand in 2020, it's going to skip it, even though it might be current. You might be using it now. I mean, I think I had one customer, I don't know how this could happen, but they were doing an integration and they had demand set up with 2014 dates. Kind of think before demand was around. I don't know exactly how that happened, but the point being is make sure that you know that when you bring in your ranges on as a part of the integration, again, this is more the technical side, but make sure you know that it's created date. Goal migration too, right? If you're using the existing goals in the planner, the business planner side, the goals framework is different. It's a completely different structure. There is a migration step of sequences that you need to go through if you want to migrate existing goals that you might have in as a part of business planner into the new goal framework. If you really haven't been using much of it, my recommendation is just start new. Because remember what I said is you're not sure how to set up goals depending on how the organizations are set, right? And data volume, make sure that you understand what you're bringing in. Like if you just open it wide open and start in 2014 to current date and bring in everything, you're going to have, your item table is going to be enormous. So I would say make sure you do your filtering on your integrations to start a subset of data. Maybe one portfolio or one organization or whatever, right? Just make sure the data volume doesn't get out of hand as far as your testing. So next steps, getting started, right? Again, I think we put this in the chat, the getting started guide. There's process guides, implementation guides, terminology, videos, lots of videos. There's learning courses. There's a capability map I referenced earlier. There's ebooks and briefs, and there's so much stuff out there, right? So that link's there. You should be able to get to that. It has all this referenced. The next thing I want to note is we have a customer advisory program. So we really encourage our customers, if they'd like to participate in that program. There's lots of different participation activities and types of activities. It could be as simple as just participating in where we want to ask you questions about a product, all the way to, hey, I want to be on stage at Knowledge talking about what I've done with APW, right? I mean, there's a lot of things you can do. So we like you to get engaged. And if you'd like to, there's a program called Customer Advocacy Program. And again, this is available on the community. You can scan the code there. There's a link. There's a lot of ways to find this, but we would really encourage you to participate because it's a key program for us to get feedback from you. And it's also, I find it's a very important vehicle for us, for you to demonstrate what you've done. So besides showing your users internally, sometimes it's nice to, especially if you like to go to Knowledge or Snug events, things like that. So that program is really important. So let me do a quick, I mentioned there's a surprise. There's agenda item number 8, and that's APW, right? So we did 4.1 today. APW 5.0 is available, but it does require Tokyo. 4.1, which we talked about today, can be brought up on San Diego or Tokyo. So this is one reason why we had the session here today, because probably a lot of customers are still in San Diego because Tokyo is rather new. So, but let you know that 5 is out. If you're on Tokyo, you could take 5. So what's in 5? What's the big thing? As I mentioned today, we did 4.1. 5 is the major release, came out in November. That's why it's a 5, right? So really the difference is in 5, we're offering a concept called lenses. is a different way to do structure your organization. Basically, it's a way to expand the planning organizations. It's a different way to look at things, grouping things, right? It's a different structure. We still have the traditional portfolio lenses, right? The more traditional PPM, right? But here you can do things by organization, more traditional, but you can do things by product. Hey, you want to set up a planning by product. If you're on the project to product organization route or transformation route, use product. You may do things by strategic priorities and initiatives, investments. There's another lens for strategy, right? So these lenses are another way to do groupings. It's really what I want to consider a more flexible way to do groupings, right? And so you've got the traditional, like I said, mentioned the lens on company, business unit, department for more traditional. But strategic lens and product lens are available in 5. There's also a lens over here that's a configurable lens. You can structure your own lens, right? And there'll be more lenses going forward. Right? As we go forward and expand, there'll be more lenses we'll provide the Bucks. So my challenge today, hopefully I knocked these off, that you understand the capabilities of APW. You understand what it takes to deploy APW, the architecture roles, kind of the setup stuff. And hopefully really important is that you understand how to communicate to your users in your business community the value of APW. So you can get sponsorship, you can get engagement sponsorship. You're probably looking for that one organization that wants to participate and be involved with helping you figure this out. So hopefully I've achieved that goal. And also for those of you who are celebrating, happy holidays, right? And I think that brings me to the end. I think this is where we're going to open up for questions and Q&A.
Hey, Scott, thanks. That was great. So one question I did see, and I'm happy to help you out, take the first one here, is I saw a lot of questions around 5.0 lenses, when's that going to be available? I think, Scott, you covered that very well at the end there, right? And just to reiterate that, customers need to be on Tokyo. The majority of our customers upgrade once a year. They do that in the, early springtime. So with Utah, we see a lot of customers coming on board with that, right? So, the intent here was to kind of get, close out the year, provide enough enablement guidance to get everybody up and running on Alignment Planner. And then next year, we're going to be hitting it hard, continue to look at the SPM events page. We're going to have, product roadmap conversations posted on there. We're going to have Molly's going to be specifically doing something around lenses. She was answering some questions here today, and we're going to even have more. We're going to do something similar like this with Scott, a longer session to talk about how to migrate and all. So all those things are coming. Excited to see all the interest there. Scott, so a couple of questions that came up. Let me run these past you. Mm-hmm. And these will apply to probably a lot of folks out there in the audience, right? Is there a way to export roadmaps to PDFs, PowerPoint, or any printable format?
Yep, that's coming in the future. That's in a roadmap item. Yep. So you're probably all familiar with the export to PowerPoint that showed up in Tokyo, like project status, right? Project. That capability will be added. I don't want to quote an exact timeline for that, but I know that is an objective. That's one of the most common is to say, I want to take that roadmap and I want to print it. I want to send it out. So print it out, send it out. So yes, that's not available in 4, but in the future it will be available. Yep.
All right. Yeah, here's an area that you've been working on a lot around rights and restriction, right? Is there a way to restrict specific portfolio roadmaps, goals, demands, and projects? We have specific portfolios and incorporate demands and projects that are confidential. We want to restrict some access there. What's your recommendation there?
Yes. So first I'd say is that's why I provided the detailed roles and rights. There's a full screen, a full slide on that. It says very specifically what's available, what can be seen, right? So that's the first method I'd say is you need to go after. If you have something that's confidential, that's might require a little bit different type of configuration, possibly of how you narrow it down. But remember, as soon as you sign roles and rights, that belong to, example, Megan can't see every portfolio. She could only see HR because I gave Megan the HR portfolio. She's a portfolio manager. So there's automatically kind of out of the box of a way to say, hey, if you're not within a certain group, you're not going to have visibility to it. So I think it's a combination of those two, depending on what level of security you really need. Like if it's highly confidential, that's probably a little bit heavier configuration. You're going to need to look at that real specific. But again, that slide references out of the box all those roles and how you get to see the roles. I would say after that, if it doesn't get close enough or good enough, is you might have to look at some ACLs possibly. Yeah.
Okay. There's no one. So a couple of people asking about personalization settings, right? Can you make personalization settings default for everyone that you're sharing the roadmap with?
So right now, the personalization is your personalization, and you can pick anything that's within the personalization frame. So if I give you 6 things, you can pick 6 things and organize it any way you want. In future, what we're going to have for you is the ability to take that personalization and share it. So if I built a roadmap with a certain view, a certain constraint of time, a certain way on personalization to show color, group by and color by and color by and so forth, and I really like that and want my team to use that, I can send them that view and they can click and you can share that view. So effectively, when you click on that and they bring it in, that's the view they stay in. That's the view they work in, right? So there is this sharing capability, like basically personalization sharing. You'll see other functions in ServiceNow to do that now too. You can kind of share, like, hey, I think in investment portal, you can share off today, in PPM investment portal, you can share off. But yep, you'll have the ability to share.
Okay, great. So we have time for 2 more questions here. If somebody has a question remaining, please put it into the QA. Scott, great information that's here today. Where can I find the video of this presentation, of this workshop, along with the toolkit?
Yeah. So, so hopefully someone can drop in the chat there. There's a link. There should be 2 links. First link will be to the community, to this actual presentation. So there's a, getting started with APW, December 7th, right? There's a link to that. And I think that comes out in an email. And they're also embedded in that will be a link to a page I created in community, which is a getting started kit that has all the links, including this presentation in a PDF format. I believe I don't know if someone, a moderator, can jump in here, but I believe the community events page will have a link to this actual recording.
Yeah, that's correct. The community events page will have a link to this recording. And I've also posted the community link and the actual getting started kit link in the chat as well.
Great. Terrific. Thank you.
All right. Scott, Mark, you might want to take yourself off of mute for this one too. Just we got 2 subject matter experts here. So can you explain in greater detail about the overlap with APM? Is it simply from the generation of demands using APM, or is there more overlap future state?
So we're planning to introduce a capability lens so that you can view the work. APW is always going to be about those planning items, demands, projects, epics, types of work. But in the future, what do you want to divide it up by? You might look at it by business applications or by capabilities.
Yeah, so you think about APM, right? I mean, it's much, much broader. That's got the full architecture. It's going to be looking at and understanding demands and projects and epics, right? It's going to know that those entities exist because they might be against a product, as an example, right? So it depends how your CSDM architecture is set up, how APW is going to interpret this. But this planning engine itself is designed to take against, again, you could structure it differently. You could do it by product. Remember we mentioned lenses, right? Different lenses. So I showed the traditional lens of project portfolio. You could have a lens for product, and you may have an architecture set up that you're migrating to a product-based model, and that's being referenced heavily in CSDM as a structure, right?
Yeah.
I wish I had maybe Mark, we should post in the getting started kit. You have the one visualization of how this all kind of comes together.
Yeah,
we can post that out there.
APW will On the community, look for the APM Start Your Journey, which is a peer workshop that we ran for APM. And we talked about this a little bit.
Yep. Yeah.
Also, take a look at digital portfolio management. That's a place where we're bringing all of these views together. Application view, the service view, and the work, the investments that are happening, the build and plan aspects of these elements.
Yeah.
All right. I see Molly's typing an answer right now, but we got time. We got 2 minutes left here. Just this last one, we'll take it up to the bottom of the hour.
Scott, go ahead. Answer the question about, because you had mentioned that program was different in PPM versus APW. I was just going to type up that they're two
Yeah,
different.
you can go ahead and
people,
answer, Mel. You're good.
but I'm not positive what you mean.
You can answer it if you like, or I can answer it.
Or go ahead.
Yeah, so they are actually two different tables, Tiffany, but by using that integration mapping, that's when you port over that execution table of the PPM program into the APW program.
Right.
Hopefully that helps.
All right. And with that, we're at 1 minute before the bottom of the hour. I want to thank everybody for showing up today, for your interest in Alignment Planner and SPM. And again, please look forward to the SPM events. Continue to look at that. We're going to have a lot of robust material that we want to share with you come the new year. So happy holidays. Love your slides, Scott. And thank you for attending. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.